Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Monday, September 9th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to talk about what we've been up to at the water cooler. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Managing Editor Jacob Paul.
Hello, hello.
Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And Writer Hoai-Tran Bui.
Hey, everyone.
Okay, I am back. I just came back from Orlando. Chris is still gone. He is in Toronto at the Toronto International Film Festival. And Jacob, you're preparing for Fantastic Fest. When does that begin?
Oh, goodness, a week from Thursday. So it's going to be me and Chris this year. So Chris will be gone for another stretch of time. But I'm very excited. It's my favorite week of the year when it comes to work events.
Okay, let's jump into what we've been doing. As I mentioned, I did travel to Orlando, Florida. I just avoided Hurricane Dorian. I was worried for a couple days there that my flights were going to be canceled because I was supposed to be flying on the same day that the eye of the storm was supposed to be over Orlando. So, but thankfully, the hurricane didn't really impact Orlando and Florida in the way it did elsewhere. But I was it wasn't like I was expecting to arrive there and see the aftermath of a storm, but you could see some aftermath of preparations for the storm that never really came to impact them in any major way. I flew out there. Universal Studios Florida flew me out there to experience Halloween Horror Nights. I have been going to Halloween Horror Nights in Universal Studios Hollywood, I think, for the last decade plus, and I love it. And this is my first time going to Florida and experiencing it there. Florida is the place it kind of started. It is the 29th year of this thing where they construct these haunted mazes, or I guess they call them haunted houses out there. We call them mazes in California. And I've always heard that it's bigger and better, and that they have all these unique original mazes that we don't get in Hollywood. And everything that was said is true. Just like everything else in Florida, they have more space. They have probably either more budget or I've heard conflicting things. Maybe it's the fact that I've heard that when you construct anything on a studio lot, it has to be unionized. So the labor that they're paying in Hollywood to construct these mazes, they're paying a lot more than what they're paying in Florida to construct these mazes. So they're probably paying a lot more people a lot less to create a lot better things. But it was a amazing experience. I videotaped it. The video is on Ordinary Adventures. We uploaded it the next morning. We spent all night editing. And it's gotten a lot of traffic. It's gotten I think 50,000 views so far. But I would recommend checking that out because it was just great. If you've never experienced an event like this, either in Hollywood or Orlando, I'd say watch this video and see what it's like. Maybe fast forward to, if you're just going to watch one section of it, fast forward to the Ghostbusters maze, which, Brad, I wish you could experience this. I wish you could go out to Florida and experience this, because the Ghostbusters maze, it was just so good. So much fun. We were I don't know. Watch the video. I'll put a link to that in the show notes, but I had a amazing time there. And while I was in Florida, I did get to visit Hollywood Studios and experience Toy Story Land for the first time, which Jacob got to experience a couple months back. Is that right?
Yeah, back in June or July at this point.
Yeah, I've watched a lot of videos of Toy Story Land, and to me it looked kind of really low budget and sad, and the roller coaster didn't seem all that exciting. I will say, being there in person, it's a lot more charming of an experience to actually be in that land and see all these oversized things. Reminds me a lot of Bugs Land, and when I was a kid, I used to go to there was a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids area, I think, of Hollywood Studios. I guess back then MGM Studios, and the roller coaster. What is the roller coaster called, Jacob?
Slinky Dog Dash.
Yeah, is a little bit more intense than you can tell from the videos. I was in the first car, so I'm not sure if that does anything to it, but that acceleration is a little fast, and the ups and downs kind of it actually made Kitra sick. So it's not like your kiddie coaster. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it has a definite kick to it, and it's a launch coaster, so you're being propelled quickly, not as intensely as other roller coasters. It's for families ultimately, but yeah, I think that and the Seven Dwarfs train over in Magic Kingdom both walk a fine line between being fun for families while also actually having a good thrill to them.
Yeah, and I also got to experience the other side of Galaxy's Edge, the other side of the galaxy, which is very much like Disneyland's version of Galaxy's Edge, but there are a lot more differences than I thought there would be, but they're mostly like more minor cosmetic things and changes in how things feel and stuff like that. We recorded a video that will probably be up this week or next week, so you can check that out because it's pointless to go in depth about that. But I did get to try the alcoholic green and blue milk, which basically just tastes like the blue and green milk from Disneyland with tequila or rum in them, and also adding the alcohol, I guess, makes it a little less frozen, so it's a little bit more of like a kind of frozen but more watery mess of a drink. But I enjoy them better than without the alcohol versions. And the other thing I wanted to say is Florida is humid. I'm not sure if you guys know this, but I was dying. I was like literally, it was. I don't think I sweat more on the first day that I was there in Orlando than I have ever sweat probably in the history of my life combined. It was like,
welcome to the East Coast, Peter. It gets humid here and it's horrible.
Well, I used to live on the East Coast. I lived in Massachusetts, and it wasn't that bad there. I don't know. Maybe my memory of it. Maybe my body has become so accustomed to living on the West Coast. But like, it was so bad that I was like, I think at one point I asked Kitra, I'm like, how do people live here? Like, how is that possible? It's like an alien environment that is not set for living creatures. But I mean, it might also be like the worst of the worst, and also like, the hurricane came off the coast, so maybe it sent more humidity. I don't know. I guess I'm making excuses for them, but
no, Peter, it truly is horrible. When I was down there earlier this summer for the Disney trip, I sweat more in those few days than I have maybe in 20 years of living in Texas. It was awful.
I was sweating so much that the sweat was going into my eyes and my eyes were burning. And then I forgot my suntan lotion or whatever spray. So I bought some in the park, which cost like $16 because they know how to screw you over, because they're like, you need this and you're not going to leave the park to go get it, so we're going to charge you $16 for it. And I put that on, and I don't know what it is about suntan lotion, but that made me sweat even more. So it was like worse, because then the sweat was making the suntan lotion go into my eyes. So I don't know. We recorded a bunch of videos. I'm hoping I don't look completely miserable during the videos. But I'll put a link to the Halloween Horror Nights one in the show notes. Jacob, I saw on Instagram that you got a new tattoo.
I did indeed. It was my 4th anniversary weekend, so my wife and I planned a whole weekend full of activities, climaxing with both of us getting tattoos, her first and my second. And it's much larger and more complicated than my first one, and therefore significantly longer and hurt more. But it is done. It is healing. It's still currently under the protective surgical wrap thing that my guy uses. So it looks really gross right now, but in a few days I can take it off, clean it off, and it will be on its way to looking perfect. So, I've reached a point where I realize, I'm just going to be a guy who has tattoos now. It's going to be a thing I do for the rest of my life. Maybe every 4 to 6 months, get another tattoo until I die. So we'll see how this goes.
Is there any realization of why this started happening? Like you jumping into tattoos? Like, is it you've realized that you don't need to have a job that's a public-facing job? Like, you're behind a computer. Like, it doesn't matter if you have tattoos.
This is true. It doesn't matter if I do. And also, I've talked about this before, but getting in shape, in my forearms, where I have both my tattoos right now, are both parts of the body. I look at them and go, oh, I am not ashamed of this part of my body. Whereas the other parts of the body still require work. But, so for me, it's sort of like a celebration of, oh, this part of my body looks like something that I am pleased to have people stare at, and someday my upper arms are the next step. I'm working on those right now, and someday my chest and shoulders will be in shape I need them to be. But for me, I feel like it is a body positivity thing. It's sort of a celebration of me no longer being ashamed of parts of my body as I get in shape.
Yes. And how was your wedding anniversary?
Oh, it was great. My wife and I watched horror movies. We drank, we ate bad food, and we just generally enjoyed each other's company for 3 days.
I'm derailing this podcast again, like I always do. But one of the comments we got on YouTube was a comment that said something like, "It's good that you and your wife have an interest in common." And since I read this comment from this YouTube commenter, it was said in a way, I'm probably not repeating it exactly. It was said in a way of like an honest, like, as if you can tell that he does not have an interest in common with his wife. And I felt so sad. I felt like so very sad. Like, is that a thing, Jacob? Because I feel like you and your wife love doing a lot of things together, right? Like,
yeah, my wife and I are literally best friends. Not like a joking way or like she's my lifetime companion, so she has to be a way, but literally, we like hanging out. We like watching the same shows. We like going to the movies. We enjoy the same things. And we, occasionally like time apart from each other, but we literally are best friends. And when people talk about their spouses or partners in ways where it's like, oh, so-and-so hates that I do this or hates that I like this, I get sad because, I really enjoy hanging out with my wife.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's something you do that she does not like to, for me and Kitra, she doesn't love magic as much as me, but she'll come to the Magic Castle every once in a while. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not like she hates it or anything like that. But I can't imagine being in a relationship where the other person doesn't have a similar interest, like at least one interest in common.
Well, let's find out for sure. Ben, how much do you hate your wife?
She's the worst. No, I mean, it's like hearing you talk about your relationship with yours is like, yeah, the exact same thing. So, I don't know. When did Slash Film Daily become a relationship podcast, Peter? Oh, jeez.
I told you I was
We
going
need
to derail
Chris
this
and his
thing.
advice corner.
Yeah. Okay. Brad, what have you been up to?
I went to Chicago over the weekend to check out the double dose of How Did This Get Made live shows that were happening at the Chicago Theater. The podcast has been on tour for a little while now, and they've been making some stops. And initially, my friend Ben and I, we'd only bought tickets to go see the early show, but then they added a late show since that sold out. And then we found out the late show was doing Space Jam. And so my friend Ben decided to buy tickets to that show as well. So we kind of made a day of it, went to Chicago for the early part of the day and got brunch and hopped around some toy stores and then went to see the two shows, and they were so much fun. The first show was Adventures of Pinocchio, which is the live-action 1996 version that starred Jonathan Taylor Thomas as the voice of Pinocchio before he became a real boy, and Martin Landau. And this is a movie that I had seen when I was a kid, and I'll talk a little bit more about it when we get later to the watching part. But it was so fun to have them riff on this movie because it's kind of traumatizing and horrifying looking back on this movie. And then the Space Jam one was also really fun because none of them had seen the movie before they watched it for the podcast, and since they're a little bit older than the generation that grew up on the movie, they had no qualms about just trashing it, which was hilarious. Even for someone like me who grew up on Space Jam and, likes it for what it is, I still recognize that it is a bad movie, and just having them just blast it was amazing. So, yeah, shout out to Paul, Jason, and June. They like to listen to Slash Film Daily occasionally. And I would also like to formally apologize for the crowd from the first show for asking such terrible, shitty, stupid questions and trying to make really bad jokes. It was extremely frustrating for everybody involved. But otherwise, the shows were hilarious. I love seeing them whenever they come into town.
Q&As are bad as is. I can't imagine one where the people are actually trying to make jokes as well.
Yeah, it's normally they're surprisingly good when you hear them on the podcast, but when you're live, you get to hear a lot of the bad shit that doesn't make it into the podcast.
Yeah. And you mentioned you went to a bunch of toy stores. Is there anything interesting in Chicago that our listeners might be interested in?
So there's two stores that my friend Ben and we've gone to a few times. They're these really small, privately owned shops. One's called Kapow Collectibles, and the other one is called Quake Collectibles. They're on the north side of Chicago. They are like just stacked full of old action figures, new action figures, loose figures you can buy, Lego sets, just tons and tons of cool stuff. And the guys who own the shops, really know their toys. It's cool to talk to them and, figure out, just talk to them about, getting new stuff and what's popular and, stuff that's coming up and that kind of thing. So yeah, if you're in the Chicago area and you're looking for good collectible shops, those two are awesome. I've been to them a few times, and they're also pretty reasonably priced too.
The question is, did you buy anything?
I did. Nothing super special though. There was a pretty good price on Bandai's SH Figuarts Batman figure from The Dark Knight, which I had my eye on for a while because I bought the Joker not too long ago. And I also picked up a Star Wars Black Series figure of Zuckuss, the Bounty Hunter, because it was the last one that I needed to complete the Empire Strikes Back roster of bounty hunters in the Black Series line.
Well, congrats.
Hey, thanks.
In HD last week, you wanted to talk about something, but you didn't?
Yes, this is something I did last week, but I forgot to talk about because I hadn't updated my bullet journal, and so I was not able to reference it when I was writing up what I was doing for the water cooler. But now I remembered. Last weekend, I went to the Color Factory, which is this sort of pop-up interactive art exhibition and is known as, quote unquote, the most Instagrammable place in New York. And it certainly is that. The Color Factory is basically a series of brightly colored room installations that have something like that is like incredibly Instagrammable. You might be familiar with the picture of people in this bright pastel blue ball pit. And that's something that's like the big staple of the Color Factory. But I actually found myself having a good time at this at the Color Factory because it's a lot more interactive than I expected it to be. So you go in and there's actually an orientation that felt very Dharma Initiative. They show you a video thing and like, this is what you do and welcome to the Color Factory. And they all have like these jumpsuits that are brightly colored as well. So it felt a little bit cultish, but it was fun to see. It was kind of nice, like nicely themed. And when you go into each room, you can spend as much time in it as you want. And they have various activities to do and various foods to try as well. There's like little macaron that you can eat at some, and another room serves like gelato. And they also like have cameras installed that let you take pictures with those cameras that they have there, and you don't have to pay extra. You already pay a fee to go in. So it was actually quite fun, and there were more like families and children running around than just Instagram influencers. So it wasn't too much of that kind of awkward situation when you're with a bunch of people who are very good at taking photos and you're not. So it was quite fun, and I actually do need to upload those photos at some point on my Instagram, but yeah, it's a good time and actually worth a couple hours if you are looking for something to do in Manhattan.
Well, cool. While HT was joining a cult of colorful Instagrammers, Jacob was reading. What was he reading?
I'm reading a book published in 2015 called Scream, Chilling Adventures in the Science of Fear by Margie Kerr. She's a sociologist at the University of Pittsburgh, and the question of the book is, why do human beings enjoy being frightened? And her whole hypothesis is that everybody has studied fear, for a very long time to come up with a cause fear and why our bodies react the way they do. So why do we seek out those feelings? Why do we seek out the feelings evolved to help us survive in a way that gives us pleasure? And it's a really fascinating book because she travels around the world. She travels to Japan to ride the tallest, fastest roller coasters. She travels to old abandoned prisons to spend the night in the isolation cells where people went crazy. She goes to world's scariest haunted houses. She climbs towers. She goes to actual supposedly haunted buildings. And each chapter is about like a different type of fear and the science of how our bodies react to fear, which chemicals are generated, how they interact with our body, which parts of our bodies are evolved to fight against fear and help us survive fear. And as somebody who loves roller coasters and loves haunted houses and loves horror movies, the whole thing is a genuinely fascinating read. And I'm getting a lot out of it as somebody who never really thought twice about why I got a thrill out of being scared. So if you want to understand horror movies or understand haunted houses or understand, the allure of the adrenaline rush and the actual science of that adrenaline rush, Scream, Chilling Adventures in the Science of Fear is a very compelling and very quick read, a little over 200 pages. I'm about halfway through it right now.
Very cool. And I'm assuming everybody can get that on Amazon, right?
Yeah, that's where I got it.
Okay.
It's under $10. It's really worth your time.
Okay, let's move on to what we've been watching this week. It Chapter 2 came to theaters, and I think Ben and Jacob saw it out of the group. Ben, what did you think?
This one, it's a tough one for me. I liked it a lot while still recognizing that it has a bunch of flaws. I love the book so much, and this movie, it's adapting essentially the other half of the original novel by Stephen King. The first movie obviously dealt with the kids' storyline, and this one is more of like the adults, but there's also some flashbacks to the kids in this one as well, and I thought those flashbacks were really artfully, beautifully done. I don't know, I loved the performances from everyone in this movie. I thought everybody was like pretty perfectly cast. And I mean, as Chris and many, many other people said in the original early round of buzz, Bill Hader, and you too, Peter, Bill Hader steals this movie. He's tremendous, and I loved seeing him have the opportunity to really sink his teeth into a character in this way, and give us something that we don't often see from him. At the same time, I realize that it's very long. It's 2 hours and 48 minutes or something crazy like that. And I know that, it adds some things, and there are some things from the book that it doesn't adapt perfectly. One of my biggest complaints, I think, is the way that the town of Derry doesn't really feel like it has that sickness or that illness to it, that infection, that you really got that sense in the first movie, and you don't get that sense at all in this film. It's almost like Andy Muschietti, the director, and I think Gary Dauberman, the screenwriter, maybe just decided to drop that as a plot point, when it's so integral to the way that the novel works and the way that the first movie works. But I don't know. I'm ultimately torn on it. But Jacob, what did you think?
I think you're mostly on the money here, Ben. Andy Muschietti clearly wants to make a fun movie here, and I think both films are incredibly fun. They're crowd pleasers. They're funny. They're scary. They're exciting. They're big, epic horror movies. And I was thinking about this. And when's the last time we had a massive, big, epic, studio horror movie? I'm thinking of The Shining or The Birds or original Robert Wise's The Haunting. These are uncommon. So I want to celebrate it in Chapter 2 for being horror blockbusters, R-rated horror blockbusters that are really swinging for it, going for the fences in ways that I want to see more of. I want to see horror, given this kind of platform. I think it's very exciting. But this movie doesn't always work, and part of it is an adaptation thing. I do think that Muschietti and Dauberman do sidestep a lot of the book's nastier elements. I mean, the book is less about a killer clown and more about how adults are willing to let children be hurt or ignore children being harmed if it serves their self-interests. And that's ultimately what that book is entirely about kids learning, the world's not a safe place. And that is really absent from these movies in a way that makes me think that they deliberately chose to leave out the really important thematic undercurrent of that 1,000-page novel. Mm-hmm. But it is an incredibly entertaining movie, sometimes too entertaining in a weird way, because there's I think of a music cue, a song cue that exists to create a laugh in the middle of a scare and kind of just ruins the scare in a way that I found really kind of annoying.
Yeah, and that's the only time, that moment that you're talking about is the only time that happens in the movie. And I almost thought that it was the editors, put it in there as a prank just for Muschietti, during the dailies, during playback or whatever. And then it somehow made its way into the final movie because it's so separate from the tone of everything else that's going on there.
Yeah, I feel like so many times this movie where as funny as Bill Hader and James Ransom playing Eddie?
Yeah.
They are fantastic actors, and they're really funny. But I feel like the movie leans on them too heavily for humor to the point where so many scares are undercut by them being funny. And I feel like there should have been some judicious editing decisions to make sure that they were used better because they're giving great stuff. But I think a little would have been a lot more. But this movie I still had a great time. I still had a really good time. But I keep on falling back on things that bother me, like, I guess minor spoiler alert, but Henry Bowers returns in this movie as he does in the novel, and you could remove him from this movie and nothing changes. He's in maybe a handful of scenes, and he's a joke. The character is treated as a joke when he's a sense of like horror in both the original miniseries and the novel, and it feels like a mistake. They should cut that. That subplot should have never been filmed, let alone left in the final cut. It is bad.
I agree.
I was going to say, now that you both have seen both chapters, do you think the idea to split it at the two different time periods was the right thing to do?
I think it's the only way it would have gotten made. But I also think that the 6-hour cut that splices all together and allows for a flashback structure may be the version of this movie I'd like the best, because there are times watching it chapter 2 where I'm thinking this is less of a complete movie and more of half of the 6-hour version that I'm going to enjoy in a couple of years.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
Yeah, me as well. Ben, you also watched some stuff this week?
Yeah, I watched The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, a 1948 film written and directed by John Huston. It stars Humphrey Bogart, Walter Huston, who's John Huston's father, and Tim Holt. And I had never seen this movie before, and it's like on the AFI list of the 100 greatest movies of all time. And it's one of these acclaimed films that I'm just like, I'd never had a chance to finally check out before. So I sat down and watched this thing, and it's very, very good. It's the premise is Bogart plays sort of like a washed up, broke, drunk kind of guy who's like hanging out in Mexico and looking for work. And he overhears this sort of old timer who's played by Walter Huston talking about prospecting for gold out in the mountains, and Bogart and this other guy played by Tim Holt team up with this old guy and go out into the wilderness and try to prospect for gold and strike it rich. And they do, and there's not really a spoiler there, but it's all the main thrust of the movie is about what happens to them afterwards, and like the degradation of their souls that occurs after this gold sort of like gets into their veins almost, where it transforms them as people, and the greed and the lust for money and all of that stuff sort of starts infecting them as human beings. And it's a really, really good movie. And like watching it now, so many things clicked in place in my head of like things that I've seen after this that are clearly referencing this movie. Like most recently, I'm thinking of Triple Frontier, the Netflix action movie from earlier this year with Ben Affleck and Oscar Isaac and a bunch of people. That movie is basically just like a modern day remake of this film, but with a little bit more of like a macho sort of military angle to it. But man, I mean, yeah, I would just recommend everybody watching this movie. Bogart is particularly great in it, and Walter Huston, who won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, is like one of the most fast-talking characters that I can remember in cinema history. He is just spewing dialogue so quickly, like to the point where it almost feels like you're listening to him on 2 times speed, and everybody else is just talking at normal speed. But yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Very cool. I wasn't going to talk about anything what we've been watching because I've been doing traveling and I haven't watched any movies or TV shows. But there was something I wanted to give a shout out to. It's a new YouTube channel that is new to me called The Endless Adventure, and this is about a couple named Eric and Allison. They basically have given up their permanent home and a normal life and basically travel the world. So they basically they will post 3 videos a week, and it's them traveling every place, internationally, domestically. They go on cruises, they go to castles. But the great thing is that they are also photographers or videographers, and they do their stuff looks so good. Like they have so many like beautiful drone shots, and just like I don't know, watching their vlogging like it makes me feel so not good as a vlogger because they make everything look so cinematic and so effortless and so just amazing. And it also makes me like, Kitra and I have been like watching this, and we have a list of things that they are doing in different places that we're like, oh, we gotta, if we ever go to Japan, we gotta go to that place and stuff like that. So it's, you know, it's a travel vlog. I don't know how. I think they have like 250,000 subscribers, which I don't think is enough to support you traveling, you know, internationally for a living. But so I'm wondering like how they pull that off. But I'm sure it's somewhere in here there's probably a video with them answering that question. But I'll link to it in the show notes. I would highly recommend it. And it feels like you know, when Ben and Amy both quit their everyday jobs, this is gonna be them. I feel like.
You know, Peter, the answer to this is probably their other YouTube channel, The Endless Crime Spree, where they video themselves robbing every place they go.
I want to see that channel. Okay, Jacob, what have you been watching?
I watched a terrible movie on Hulu, streaming there, called Bigfoot County. It wants to be Blair Witch with Bigfoot. It is very bad. I do not recommend you wasting your time on it, and I like bad found footage movies. Big, hard pass skip. But also streaming on Hulu, Pumpkinhead, a very strange movie. I think it's 1988. Noteworthy for a few reasons. It is the only film directed by Stan Winston, the creature effects extraordinaire who made the dinosaurs of Jurassic Park, designed the Terminator for James Cameron. I believe he helped build the Predator. He passed away in the 2000s, I believe, but he is a legendary special effects designer. If you have seen movies, you have seen Stan Winston's work. Pumpkinhead is him trying to make a movie, and it has a reputation for being terrible, but it's gained a cult following. And revisiting now, it holds up pretty well. It's an 80s splatter movie. Lance Henriksen from Aliens and among other many movies, he played Bishop in Aliens, in a rare leading man role as a redneck type who runs a little shop in the middle of like the rural countryside of America. His young son is killed by some city folk who run him over with a motorcycle by accident. So Lance Henriksen goes to the neighborhood witch in the middle of the woods and summons Pumpkinhead, a vengeance demon, to hunt down and kill the teenagers. And Lance Henriksen has a crisis of conscience and goes out to save them instead and stop Pumpkinhead. And Pumpkinhead himself is this very large practical monster. He's very cool, very gooey. If you like practical monsters, he's worth seeking out. The movie itself is only okay. It has really good moments. Doesn't really hold together entirely. Its budget is showing at the seams in pretty much every single major scene. But Pumpkinhead is a really nifty little artifact and a forgotten 80s monster movie that I would recommend checking out if any of this sounds appealing.
Very cool. And Brad, you mentioned earlier The Adventures of Pinocchio. Did you revisit this in anticipation for how did this get made?
Yes, I did, because my friend Ben had not seen the movie. He was a little too old around the time the movie came out to take interest in it. I had seen it when I was a kid, but I hadn't seen it in a long, long time. So I didn't remember just how weird and unintentionally erotic and sometimes inappropriate this movie is. It's very, very strange, and like there are dated effects in it too, because like they have a computer animated cricket whose name is Pepe in this one, because Jiminy Cricket's a Disney character, and so they had to give this cricket a different name, and it's just real bad. Like basically the same kind of animation that they brought that creature in the Lost in Space movie to life. Like it has not aged well at all. And while the puppet effects for the time for Pinocchio done by the Jim Henson Company were, I'm sure, pretty good, they're just kind of weird now. And it's just a lot of the stuff that happens in Pinocchio when it's brought to live action form, it's extremely odd and very unnerving. Rob Schneider's in this movie, which I completely forgot, which is very, very weird. And like he doesn't even try to put on like an Italian accent or a British accent. He's just Rob Schneider. Like he might as well come into a scene and go Geppetto making puppets. It's just it is, oh my gosh. If you haven't seen this movie, like I recommend seeking it out just because it is something to experience. It is so weird. The best thing about it is how did this get made is that they had during the show Paul has his computer so that he can reference clips and things like that while they're talking about the movie. And the background picture on his computer that he had during the Adventures of Pinocchio show was this image of the puppet with his mouth wide open and whipped cream all over his face, because there's a whole sequence in the movie where he innocently steals like baked goods from this from a bakery, and he keeps eating them, so he gets all this whipped cream over his face. Because of it, there's just so many like just double entendres that come out of it. And every time the image popped up, when he would switch between clips and stuff like that, the audience was laughing because the picture was just so hilarious. But yeah, this movie is just, if you, like I said, watch it. It's weird, and yeah.
Where can you find this, Brad?
It looks like The Adventures of Pinocchio. You can watch it on Vudu. It's one of their like free movies that you can watch with ads on there. Otherwise, you can just rent it for like $3 from Amazon or YouTube or Google Play or whatever.
Okay, let's move on to HT. I see that you watched the first 2 episodes of The Leftovers. Was it the Avengers snap, or was it the upcoming Watchmen series that made you want to finally dive into this HBO series?
Well, maybe it was a combo of both, but, I've been wanting to dive into The Leftovers for a long time because I am one of the ardent defenders of Lost in its final season. And I remember when The Leftovers was getting all this critical acclaim, people were praising it as sort of Damon Lindelof's, his lessons learned from Lost that he made into an even better show, and people compared it favorably to Lost. And, I would have a reaction saying, Lost is great, first of all, but it did pique my interest in The Leftovers, but I never got around to it. And yes, when Avengers Endgame came out, and I absolutely loved that first half of the movie, and how it kind of became almost a meditation on grief, and the idea of being very similar to the premise of The Leftovers, which is about 2% of the population suddenly disappears, and the show tackles the aftermath of that 3 years later. So my friend who actually had seen The Leftovers was like, "You love the first half of Endgame. You should just watch The Leftovers." And so I finally got around to it, and it's very good, guys. I really love how much it takes its time, and I was, other than the first scene in which you see the actual disappearance, I think I don't remember what they call it in the show, the departure or something. There isn't much of the sci-fi element to it, which I was a little surprised at, but I do like the character drama and the kind of slow burn and the intricacies of those character dynamics that are being shown in those first 2 episodes. I was also surprised to see that Carrie Coon doesn't show up until like the end of the first episode, or maybe even the second episode, because I had heard so much about her performance and how she was kind of like that second co-lead with Justin Theroux, who is also excellent in this. But I'm really liking it so far, and I like that the intrigue and the mystery isn't about any sort of flashy element or sci-fi element, but it's just about wanting to know more about these people and what they're going through and the grief and how they came to be this way. So I'm really looking forward to watching the rest of it. I'm adding it to my many lists of shows that I'm just making my way through.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear.
Succession, I'll get to you at some point.
I'm curious to hear what you think of the rest of the series. You watched some new movies as well?
Yes. So I talked about seeing Hustlers last week, but I finally will be able to talk more about my opinion about it because it made its world premiere at TIFF this weekend. And I liked it, and I loved a lot of aspects of it, including Jennifer Lopez, who is just fantastic in this film. Honestly, one of her best career performances, I would say. Just kind of glamour incarnate. And she kind of takes this movie by the balls and takes controls of it because she's just so fascinating and so fun to watch in this movie. But I have to say, I didn't love it as much as everyone else at TIFF did, and I wonder if I was missing something because everyone is raving about it, and I liked it a lot. And I really like, especially when it becomes more of an acerbic, sharp black comedy in its second half. But I think it just takes a long time to get to the scam itself, which is based on a true life story that was written about in a New York Magazine article. And that first half of the film is more kind of like this gritty kitchen sink realism, which I enjoyed. But then once you get to the scam, the film kind of switches gears and becomes more of this zippy black comedy, which I also enjoyed. But I felt like at some point the dissonance between those two took me out of the movie a little bit. But the cast is great. Jennifer Lopez, again, just so fantastic. Constance Wu is really good too, and she's actually the protagonist. So I feel kind of bad because she does get a little bit overshadowed by Jennifer Lopez. But they have such a great character dynamic and relationship. I really like the dive into female relationships in this film and how complex and how kind of thorny it can be, as well as the lack of the male gaze in this film. It is a movie about strippers, running a scam against Wall Street clients, but it never gets too leering or too sort of exploitative, which I do feel at some point kind of becomes a detriment to the movie because it doesn't like to get nasty at all. It does feel like very glossy and kind of crowd pleasing, but in a way that I really enjoyed. So I will say it's a good film, and I wish I liked it as much as everyone else. But Jennifer Lopez is definitely a reason to watch Hustlers.
Okay, and you also saw Climax?
Yes, Climax just got released on Hulu, and I got a chance to watch it. This is the Gaspar Noé dance drug film, I guess you would say. And I really liked it, especially how it just goes completely off the rails in the last 45 minutes. I really love movies that kind of take its time building that dread and that anticipation in the first half and then go completely off the rails in that second half. And Climax does a great job of doing that. It's actually even slower in its first half because it's not about that atmosphere as much as it is about the character relationships that are established slowly and kind of all the different dynamics that are taking place within this dance troupe that are in this sort of isolated, empty school where they are rehearsing a new dance sequence. And so the first half does take its time, but then once it really kicks into gear, it really does, because at some points during the party in which they're celebrating their successful rehearsal, the dancers all drink the sangria, which is, unbeknownst to them, laced with LSD. And the last 45 minutes of this film just becomes a relentless, intense, agonizing drug trip that gets really violent and unnerving, but it's something that you can't look away from. And it is excellent. Sophie Butella is the only name actress in this. I think a lot of the other actors and actresses in this film are just dancers first and foremost, but they do a great job at the more dramatic moments of this movie as well.
And you also did a anime double feature?
Yes. Okay. So please forgive me if I go a little long at this, because these are two movies that are very close to my heart. But I learned recently that the Metrograph was doing a special screening of Spirited Away at their theater, and that they were also doing a sort of Satoshi Kon celebration. And I was really excited to do a double feature of Spirited Away and Millennium Actress, aka two anime masterpieces that make me cry. These are two movies that I deeply adore. I love Spirited Away so much to the point that I get like a physical reaction to it. You might notice I'm like,
yeah,
I'm okay. But I was trembling for a lot of watching the movie in theaters because I was just so excited to see it again. It was actually my first time seeing it in theaters because I had first seen it when I got a DVD double pack with Spirited Away and Castle in the Sky that my mom bought me when I was 12. And that was kind of a nice kind of turning point for me. I guess you could call it my movie buff origin story, because when I saw those movies, I just fell in love with them completely and decided to start collecting Studio Ghibli movies from then on. And I have the whole pantheon of movies that are still at my parents' house. I haven't taken them up yet. But Spirited Away was a movie that really left an impact on me. And I watched it so much that I scratched my DVD copy and actually have not seen it in about 5 years. So I was just really excited to see this movie again and see it in theaters. And I I had actually forgotten that I bought tickets for a subtitled version. So this is the Japanese language version with English subtitles. And I've seen both versions of versions of the movies dozens of times. But I don't think the parents in my theater were aware that this was subtitles, because there was a lot of kids there who I'm pretty sure do not know how to read. So at the beginning, people were pretty restless. But the brilliant imagery of Spirited Away and just like the gorgeous animation, I think, was actually able to calm down a lot of the kids who stayed for the entirety of it and were pretty quiet, apart from a few sequences that were a little bit, disturbing parts. But
wait, did any families walk out?
No families walked out.
No?
There was one kid that kept going to the bathroom, but other than that, everyone stayed, and I was quite surprised by that. So pleasantly so, because if parents are showing their kids Spirited Away, that's a great sign of the future.
Yes. By the way, this is my favorite Miyazaki film. I haven't seen them all like you, but I just love Spirited Away.
I love it so much. It's my favorite Miyazaki film, but not only that, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. One thing I love about watching Spirited Away again, and it's as great as I remember, is that I can always sort of glean something new from it. Since it's been so long since I'd watched it, I was able to kind of I always get something new. And this time I was struck by the sort of Greek mythology elements that are scattered throughout this film. I especially like the idea of, like the underworld and Persephone and Orpheus as well being recognizable elements in this movie. So I just wanted to give a shout out to that. But also, in watching the English subtitled version again, I will say that the English dub is not bad. The Disney dubs of the Ghibli movies are actually quite good. And there are a few differences between the English dub and English subtitled version. The key one being, that in the end of Spirited Away, I'm going to give slight spoilers, as Chihiro and her parents are driving away. In the English dub version, her parents say, "New school, new life, new friends." That does sound really scary. And she says, "I think I can handle it." But in the Japanese version, they drive away and say nothing. And I actually really like and prefer that version of the ending, because it lends an ambiguity to the movie that kind of makes you question whether she remembers the incidences that took place in the spirit world, whether she actually is able to recall all the things that happened. And it's kind of hinted at when you see them leaving, and it's a repeat of the same scene at the beginning, and you kind of get the inkling that maybe she reverted back to her old self. But then when she looks back and you see the flash of her new hair tie, it kind of is like there's a little kernel of it that maybe stayed with her. And I like that reading a lot. It's something that always really struck me. And so, yeah, Spirited Away is a movie that's really special to me. It introduced a whole spectrum of emotions that I was not aware that I was capable of feeling when I was 12 years old. I do have to give a shout out to the train sequence, which is just as beautiful today as it was back when I first saw it, and really left an impression on me as a kid. It's a sequence that is so quiet and yet so filled with meaning and this deep melancholy that, again, I was just like, what is this feeling that I'm feeling when I was 12? And I was not really able to articulate it as a kid. And even now, I don't know if I'm able to fully articulate why I love it so much. But it's just like the facelessness of everything, and the faceless spirits literally that are passing by, and the kind of ephemeral nature of all of it that really touches me still and moves me even now. So I just want to talk about how I love Spirited Away so much, and how it led into the next film that I watched, Millennium Actress, which is not it's not a Studio Ghibli film. It's directed by Satoshi Kon, who I guess you could say is almost the polar opposite stylistically to Miyazaki, where Miyazaki, his films approach the world from a more fantastical perspective, and from the perspective of wanting to make life more interesting and life more beautiful. I'm sorry for going so long. There is a great NHK documentary series about 10 years with Hayao Miyazaki, in which and there's a moment in which he says, he's looking at these rooftops and he's saying, I'm imagining, a man leaping off of this rooftop and like flying up this rooftop and then soaring down to this other rooftop. And it's not something that you can see in real life, but in my mind, it's something that happens. And that's what a Miyazaki film is. But Satoshi Kon, in contrast, is all hard lines, very earthy and very realistic, despite Millennium Actress being a very dreamy and surreal film. Satoshi Kon you might recognize from films like Paprika or Perfect Blue, but Millennium Actress is actually my favorite of his films. It's definitely an underrated classic of his because I think it's because it's not as visually striking as his other films. It's a lot more muted in its color scheme, a lot of reds and browns, and a lot of like sepia tones to match the nostalgic color of the time in which it takes place. It follows a legendary actress who is retired and these two documentary filmmakers who are trying to do a story about her life and doing an interview with her.
But
as
by the way, can you imagine an American animated film being about documentary filmmakers or featuring documentary?
You cannot.
No.
You cannot. No, I probably not. But yeah, I think that this is a film that it can only be done in animation too, because the way that it approaches this actress's life story is that as she tells her story, the documentary filmmakers find themselves living it with her and actually actively participating in her past and affecting it. And as she tells her story, which is as a child, as a young girl, she met this man who was a political fugitive and she decides to rescue him. But and when she falls in love with him, he the next day disappears, and with the promise to see her again. And so she decides to become an actress to find a way to meet him. And through the rest of her life, she's always trying to search for him. And through her career as an actress, she starts to play like these ingenues who are always searching for something, always yearning for something. And as she tells her life story, her actual life starts to blend with the films that she made and the characters that she played, who are all, running and searching and yearning for that one thing. And it goes from, her life living in post-World War II Japan, to suddenly she is in a samurai film, suddenly she is in an astronaut drama, and the editing is so seamless and so smooth that even the audience is taken for a ride to question what reality is happening and where that fiction ends and where her life begins. So it's a really beautifully made film, and I want to give a shout out. I'm gonna stop talking so much soon. To Satoshi Kon's editing style and how brilliant it is, because even though his characters, his animation style is much more realistic, his characters, especially their faces, are really expressive compared to Miyazaki films. I think his power and his greatest achievement is in his editing style, which really makes use of those fast cuts, but it makes use of the medium animation as well, because he is able to show a shot that is like a fraction of a second long, and he inserts it between two other shots that take place just as rapidly. And it's something that you can't really do in a live action film because of the lack of budget, the lack of resources, the lack of time, and yet he squeezes all those things in. And these shots barely register; they're almost subliminal in a lot of senses, but they work so effectively in creating that dreamlike, that really off-kilter sort of ambience to the film. And yeah, Millennium Actress is really fantastic. I highly recommend watching it. Oh, I was also struck by how much the structure is similar to Citizen Kane. I hadn't recognized this back when I first watched it, but I don't think it's hyperbolic to say that this is the Citizen Kane of anime films. You know what? In fact, I'm going to say it. But yeah, this is a film I saw when I was young, and it really bowled me over because it made me realize that movies could be like this, that movies could do something so weird and unique, and testing of the boundaries of filmmaking. So I highly recommend seeing it, especially if you like his other film, Perfect Blue, which similarly explores issues of identity and personas through the lens of a film camera, but in a way that's much more optimistic, because Perfect Blue is a psychological thriller that I will never watch again because it just made me feel so horrible. And yeah, Millennium Actress, highly recommend.
Well, thank you, HT, for that emotional recap of those two anime films. I'm sure that probably put those films on the radar of people that probably have not watched them yet. So that's a good thing. Let's move on to what we've been eating. When I was in Orlando, I did eat some bad stuff. I went to the Toothsome Chocolate Emporium and Savory Feast Kitchen in Universal City Walk. This is basically Universal City Walk's version of Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory. It's a restaurant, but they have these decadent desserts and milkshakes. We did a video on this as well, which will be up, next week or something like that. But we weren't really bowled over by all the food that was there, but the milkshakes are great. And these are like those like Instagrammable milkshakes where like it has like a gigantic piece of cake, like coming out of the top of the milkshake. And then like the glass itself has like frosting with like, sprinkles and, it's just like, way more than you can possibly handle. And I'll say the milkshake itself that we had, which I think was like frosted cake milkshake or something like that, was fantastic. But I would not eat there for the food. I would just go there and get a milkshake. And
is it like a $20 milkshake, Peter?
I wish I knew what the price was. It was definitely over $10. I don't know. I don't think it was $20. There is a place like this in New York City and in Disney, downtown Disney, called Black Tap. So you should check that out when you're in the city next.
Black Tap.
Yeah, they actually have good food, but they have like these huge Instagrammable.
I like to have you say they actually have good food.
Yeah, they actually have good food. They're not a theme park restaurant.
Okay.
But their milkshakes are like even more like, at least like at this Toothsome place, the piece of cake that was coming out of the milkshake, I think was like a smaller piece of cake. Like at Black Tap, like when you have like a piece of cake coming out of your milkshake, it's like a full size piece of cake coming out of the milkshake. It's insane. So I like Black Tap over Toothsome. But the other thing I tried at Universal City Walk is we went back to Antojitos, which is a Mexican place. We recently tried. They just recently opened it in City Walk in Hollywood, and we went there and did a video on that. I talked about it last week on the water cooler. Antojitos is, I think, our Kitra and I's favorite place in Universal City Walk, Orlando, to eat. It's a Mexican food place, but it's kind of like a New Mex, or like I guess like an American, like what do you call that? It's like when it's like a mashup of cuisines. It's kind of like Americanized Mexican food. They have like a
like Tex-Mex.
Yeah, I guess it's like Tex-Mex, but it's a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. On stage, they have a mariachi band playing like American, like, top 20 songs from the last like 2 years, but like in mariachi style. So it's it totally, like, I'm not sure if it's wrong or not, but it's fun. And they have amazing margaritas. So if you like margaritas, head there and get some of the margaritas. And we did not tape this for the channel, so you will not see this. The last thing I wanted to mention is whenever I'm in Orlando, I end up Ubering to Uno's Pizzeria. Uno's is a chain from the East Coast that I grew up with in Massachusetts. It actually started in Chicago because they created the deep dish pizza. If you ask them, or if you look on Wikipedia, it's either them or another place. There's not quite accurate records, but they might have created the deep dish pizza. I don't go there for the deep dish pizza. The thing I grew up on are these things called pizza skins, which is basically a pizza crust in a small deep dish pan, which they put mashed potatoes, they melt cheese on top of it, and they put bacon. So it's basically potato skins, but in deep dish pizza form. And I used to have them all the time when I lived in Massachusetts. And whenever I'm in Orlando, there's one close by to the parks that we usually Uber or Postmates from. And I got to have my pizza skins. It is a chain restaurant. It's nothing to, like, probably for anybody other than me to go out of their way for. But I really like the pizza skin. So putting that on your radar, if you have a Uno's near you, I think it's a chain on the East Coast. It's not here on the West Coast. Check out.
There's one in I think there's a few in Chicago actually.
Yeah. Like I said, they were possibly the people that created deep dish pizza.
I might actually have to go to an Uno sometime just to try this pizza skin thing you're talking about, because it sounds pretty fucking good.
It is really good. Although I will say, when I had it when I was a teenager in Massachusetts, it used to be like a much bigger size, and I think now that they have to release the calorie counts and stuff like that, it has shrunk quite a bit. So it's like a really mini size deep dish pizza. But it's still good. I would, Brad, definitely check it out and report back in a later edition of the water cooler and what we've been eating.
And sometime you have to come to Chicago to actually try
real deep dish
pizza.
Yeah. Although I will say, in LA, the best deep dish pizza is Hollywood Pies, which you once had when you were here, and you said it was just okay. So.
Yeah, it was fine, but it wasn't as good as actual Chicago deep dish pizza.
I love it. You're not going to take this away from me, Brad. What have you been eating this week?
So I got my hands on a new M&M for Halloween. There are creepy Cocoa Crisp M&Ms, which are basically, it's kind of, I guess you would say, like a Cocoa Pebbles flavored kind of M&M, and it's just a crispy M&M that kind of has like a dusting of cocoa chocolate inside of it instead of just the regular milk chocolate. So the difference is subtle. It's still pretty good. It tastes, like I said, kind of like if they crushed up chocolate pebbles and put them inside a crispy M&M. So they're pretty good, but they're not as good as my favorite crispy M&M, and really my favorite M&M overall is the crispy mint M&M that comes out around Christmas time. But you can get those. I think it's a Target exclusive, but they're out for Halloween right now. So if you want to try those, they're out there. And then KFC recently announced a new Famous Bowl. The Famous Bowl on their menu is that thing that combines like the mashed potatoes with the corn and the chicken with some cheese and gravy in it. And they recently came out with a new one that is a mac and cheese Famous Bowl. It doesn't have all the other stuff in it. It's basically just mac and cheese with a chicken in it. But I like KFC's mac and cheese, and I guess it's just nice to be able to order it and like have the chicken that's in it proportional to the serving, as opposed to just trying to shove chicken into it myself, especially because they don't ever really sell a larger portion of the mac and cheese. It's usually like a side order, so you'd have to like get like a large, probably catered size version, I guess. So yeah, it's just chicken inside the mac and cheese at KFC, which I enjoy. So if you like both those things, then you'll probably like that.
Cool. And let's move on to what we've been playing. Brad, what have you been playing this week?
So I haven't really been playing with this necessarily, but I did receive it, and I thought it's pretty cool, and I thought it warranted worth talking about. Hasbro sent me the first figure in their new Hyper Real Black Series line for Star Wars figures. And this is basically a figure that comes somewhere in between a Hot Toys figure and the normal 6-inch Black Series figures. It's intended to have be a little bit more detailed. It has a metal skeleton inside of it for more, I guess, diverse or just more posability. Essentially, the articulation on it is much more than the normal Black Series figures would allow, and pretty much right on par with what Hot Toys figures allow too. And so there's a little bit more detail on the sculpt. Since it's a bigger figure, it's 8 inches instead of the normal 6 inches for Hasbro's Black Series line. It's I don't know if I've said it already, but it's a Darth Vader figure is the first figure in this line. And it's not necessarily the best example of what they can do with this line, because Vader is not necessarily a character who requires a lot of flexibility, and his design and his suit is pretty basic, so you don't really get too much of a sense of how detailed these figures can be. But the sculpt of his suit and the helmet is done pretty well, and the body is interesting because it's a metal skeleton inside the figure, so the arms and legs, the stuff that aren't his armor and his cape, are it's a very flexible rubber. So when you touch it, it almost feels like one of those cheap, stretchy rubber like figures that you can buy that don't break because they just bend and you can move them in any position. But because the skeleton is inside of it, it has a certain rigidity to it where you do have to work a little bit harder, I guess you would say, to move it and pose it. But it's a very cool figure. It comes with a bunch of different hands so that you can have him either use do a force push or point, or have his arms folded with his fists, or things like that. He comes with his lightsaber, and he comes with like this basically what is a laser blast deflection accessory that you can put on his force hand that makes it look like he's deflecting a bolt, but it looks like kind of just a white explosion on his hand, so it doesn't have quite the same effect. It almost looks like he's shooting ice out of his hand, which is kind of weird. And it's a pretty cool figure. I'm not necessarily sure that it's worth the price point, because this figure I think retails for like $80 on shelves, and for like the Hot Toys figures are definitely more expensive, but you get a lot more quality and accessories and things like that with it, as well as detail. And I wish, like, for this kind of price point, since it's literally like it's 4 times as much as a Black Series figure, that they would have done something a little bit extra for it, like have the lightsaber have the ability to light up, or at least put like a wire inside of his cape to allow for to pose the cape for cool stances and stuff like that. But besides that, it's a pretty cool figure. They've already announced that the next one they're doing is Luke Skywalker in his Bespin gear, so it'll be interesting to see how that figure compares and how it works when you have an actual person that's flesh and has a face sculpt, to see how much the detail works with it. So yeah, the hyperreal Darth Vader figure from Hasbro, I think it's out on shelves now, so keep an eye out for it.
Sounds to me like it's not quite collectible yet. It's still more of a toy.
I don't know. It's like it's somewhere in between, because like it does have a very collectible look about it, and the way that you can pose it. It's made to be posed on a shelf. It comes with like a little base that looks like it's part of like the Death Star foil, like basically like the base that he kneels on when he talks to the Emperor. It looks kind of like that. So it's somewhere in between, because it's a little too heavy duty to be like a toy that you would play with. It definitely has a collectible feel to it.
You know what I miss? I miss the Unleashed things that they used to do for Star Wars. That was Hasbro, right?
I think so, yeah. And those were pretty cool. They were like basically like kind of like cheaper plastic statues essentially that had them in like much more realistic looking designs, but they had like the lightsabers, like there was like a wave of them if they were like getting ready to hit something, or there was flames around them and stuff. They were pretty cool.
Yeah, I feel like from afar on a shelf you couldn't tell the difference between that and like a Sideshow collectible statue, but I guess that's my problem with like action figures on a shelf. Like you can tell that they're action figures.
Yeah, they have gotten better though, because I like the Black Series figures especially. Now that they use 3D printing technology for the faces, so the face sculpts now actually look very much like the actors who play the characters, which makes the figures it adds a much different feel to them. It makes them feel less like toys. And Marvel Legends does the same thing, because that's also created by Hasbro. And I've been collecting a lot of the Avengers figures, and the face sculpts for all those characters are awesome too.
Very cool. That does it for us on today's episode. You can find more of all of our work at slashfilm.com. You can find this podcast, Slash Film Daily, published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. And please head on over to our iTunes page, give us a 5-star review, tell your friends, spread the word. We'll see you tomorrow.
Hey, Peter.
Oh no.
Jacob, it's okay. I survived the hurricane. I survived the humidity. I can take this. And you know what? HT is now in the color of cult, or the cult of color. So we're fine.
You can't defeat me.
Yes.
Peter, I said, I've opened the gargantuan book of insult, offense, and effrontery, sharp retorts, riposts, caustic quips, and impolite put-downs by Louis A. Sapien.
Yeah.
To the crabs section. Crabs section.
Wait, there's a what kind of
were we supposed to respond?
is this animal crabs or is this like
T, everyone has a good word for her. They all whisper it. Ben, he has an open mind. It should be closed for repairs. Brad, arguing with him is like trying to blow out an electric light bulb.
Okay.
And Peter, he has a disposition like an untipped waiter.
Peter, did you hear? A disposition like an untipped waiter.
you didn't
Peter
quite say
has
it.
a disposition like an untipped waiter.
I don't understand what this has to do with crabs.
I don't either.
Because they're crabby.
They're grumpy. Yeah, they're grumps.
They're crabby.
Oh, Peter, you're so disagreeable. Your own shadow will keep you company.
That's not good, Jacob. They're not
Ben,
good.
Ben, you're so contrary. You do everything verse vice.
Yeah, Ben.
that one's funny. I like that one.
See, the book brought some joy today.
No, see, Peter, you just created a problem. You gave a mouse a cookie, and now we are fucked.
Now we have to drink this glass of milk forever.
There's only 300 more pages.